I'm joined now by Rachel Maddow, host of The Rachel Maddow Show, Joy Reid, host of The Readout, Jen Psaki, host of Inside with Jen Psaki, and Alex Wagner, host of Alex Wagner Tonight. And Rachel, when he got to that turn in the speech, you could just sort of feel everything kind of go to a different level.
Yeah. You know, Chris, I had wondered heading into this speech whether he was going to try to give some sort of warning to the country. When we had advice, basically planning advice, that the speech might not be very long. And when we saw the White House today release what they called a letter, but was really about 100-plus page long book explaining his view of his own accomplishments during this term, I had wondered, okay, well, they're not taking a lot of time in this speech. They have spelled out the list of accomplishments in writing ahead of the speech. So maybe this speech is going to be for something else. Maybe this is going to be a warning. I did not expect it to be this stark. As you said, he said, tonight there is an oligarchy taking shape in America. Dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people, a tech industrial complex that poses real dangers. He talked about a tide of misinformation and disinformation enabling the abuse of power. Not just saying misinformation and disinformation are bad on their own, but why are they there? They are there to enable the abuse of power. He talked about the free press crumbling, which put a shiver down my spine, and then talked about how truth is being sacrificed for lies for the purposes of power and profit. So this is important because he has essentially decided not to brag on the way out about what he did. He did a little of that, but really he's taken this last moment to say, here is what we've got right now, and this is why. This is not just dangerous because it doesn't sound American. It's dangerous because this is what they're doing to you with this oligarchy, with this concentration of power, and with what they're doing to the press and the truth. And that is stark and sober, and like I said, it put a chill down my spine. I think he's correct, and I'm glad he took this time to say it.
Joy.
Yeah, this struck me as two speeches. The first speech, you could say, is that's so Biden. Biden is a true nostalgia candidate in a way that Trump is as well, but they're nostalgic for different reasons. I mean, he genuinely believes, if you've been paying attention to Joe Biden over the last many years, he genuinely believes in the American project, full stop. He believes in all of the rose-colored glass ideas about America, and he will always lead with that. And he did that for the first half of the speech, talking about the Statue of Liberty, giving that moving story about the people who built it, and then sort of closing with that as well. But that second part of the speech, to Rachel's point, that was the speech. Because Joe Biden, while he is a nostalgia politician, he also in some ways is an aggressively progressive politician in a certain way, in that he really does believe in recentering what could be called America first. He believes that if you're going to have the AI industry, it needs to be in America. He really aggressively believes in repatriating some of this sort of internationalized commerce that has really hurt the working class and bringing it back. And he's actually proven it. He's done it. He stood by the unions. But that part where he then gives this warning that could have really, that we've been talking about on this air, right? This concentration of power in the hands of this tech industrial complex, the smothering of the lies being smothered for power and profit, saying the people must govern. Essentially saying that this thing that he loves so much, this America, is literally being essentially stolen by the oligarchs who've tried to do it before. And he talked about having to bust the trusts after the Gilded Age. And he did reference Eisenhower, because Eisenhower turned out to be right. We have been consumed by a military-industrial complex that feeds on war and feeds on the pain of war and on the cost of war and makes the Pentagon unassailable, its budget. But now you do see this concentration of power by tech oligarchs who have seized control of our politics and are about to have an office in the Eisenhower building in our Capitol, that are about to essentially co-run this country with the incoming president. Biden's not a radical, but it's going to strike, I think, a lot of people on the right as that being a radical thing for a president to say. But it needed to be said, and it needed to be said from the Oval. And I'm glad that he did.
I want to come to you, Alex and Jen. I want to play that clip again just to reset it. When he talked about the oligarchy, it was just a striking moment, just using that word and saying it so plainly. He talks about today an oligarchy is taking shape. Take a listen.
Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. We see the consequences all across America, and we've seen it before. More than a century ago, but the American people stood up to the robber barons back then and busted the trusts. They didn't punish the wealthy, just made the wealthy play by the rules everybody else had to.
Alex.
When he said that, you and I were both on set looking at each other like Joe Biden just said oligarchy in his closing address to Americans. It's very clear that he was thinking about, I think, an image that we've all sort of projected in advance, which is the fact that Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Sam Altman are going to be on the dais at the inauguration for Donald Trump. Joe Biden has been very vocal about the fact that Meta is ending fact-checking. He brought it up again in this series of remarks. These pictures are already haunting him in the closing days of his presidency. But it's not just that concentration of power that he clearly thinks of as a direct threat to democracy. He also called out the Supreme Court, right? To go out. This is Joe Biden, who wouldn't say a bad word about the court.
Yep.
And by the way, can I just say, props to him for mentioning the free press, because he has had a complicated relationship in terms of access, giving the press access to this particular presidency. But he is an institutionalist to the core. For him to call out the Supreme Court in the way that he did, call for term limits, call for an enforceable code of ethics, and call out their decision on presidential immunity is someone who, I'm with Joy on this. He believes in the American project, but it is clear that that vision he has, that belief he has, is very much frayed at the edges as he says goodbye to the presidency.
Jen, if you had to do the sort of 140-character version of Madison's insight in constitutional governance, it's that concentration of power leads to abuse of power, and that is precisely the warning that we were getting from someone that you worked for and saw up close over part of what is one of the longest careers in American politics.
That's exactly right. And someone, as Alex just said, is an institutionalist who believes in the peaceful transfer of power, who believes of the power of the presidency, even when it's held by different parties. And what I was really struck by, everything you all said, of course, was also the tone. If you look back at Joe Biden's speeches, and I was there for many of them, I was in many preps for many of them, typically he does a more traditional announcement of the policy. This is what we're doing. He doesn't speak as frequently, as directly to the American public as he just did in that speech. And I wrote down, he started from the beginning, and the order of events is also a choice here in any speech, especially one that's this short, because a more traditional Joe Biden speech would have started with a listicle of accomplishments, which is, I think, what I expected, right? And instead, he started out with what was almost kind of this lengthy analogy about the Statue of Liberty and standing up to a storm. The storm we can all assume is Donald Trump and the Trump administration. And he said in the early part, it's about who we are and who we stand for. And the rest of the speech seemed to be setting up not for what government and the Supreme Court and Congress and the president who's going to sit here is going to do to protect you, but you are going to protect yourself. And I am not passing the baton to my successor, as he would do if it were Mitt Romney or someone else. I'm passing it to you. And the last line was where he said, "It is now your turn to stand guard," which is so striking because it really, for me, kind of meets the moment that we're in, which is that you're looking at a person who is going to be an embracer of the oligarchs, who Alex just mentioned, the main leaders of these tech companies, who are probably going to have, we'll see, unfettered access to the Oval Office. You have a Supreme Court they're controlling. They are not protecting you, American public, from these threats we're facing. You have to protect yourselves, all of us, and also the institutions he started the speech talking about.
Yeah, this wasn't I know everyone feels scared and panicked right now, but you're going to be okay, kiddo.
Right. No.
Yeah, that was not the speech, Alex.
It also, in a weird way, wasn't about Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump is the sort of harbinger of a doom that is much broader, right? He's talking about institutional atrophy. He's talking about the corruption of American democracy, the crumbling of a free press. I mean, as much as people would like to blame all of that on Donald Trump and MAGAism, the roots of that extend far beyond that, which I think is why you see a pivot towards not just like Trump, who, by the way, the American people elected, but a refocusing on sort of civic duty in this hour, right? Like, you guys elected him, understand that there's a lot of swirl here, and it's going to be up to you to stand watch.
Rachel, this has been a theme, I think, of your coverage throughout this period of the kind of the duty falling to the citizen. It's something that Barack Obama has talked about as well. And that last line that Jen highlights, that like, I pass the baton of standing guard to you, the citizen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, you know, the other thing he said right at the close of the speech, he said, I love the United States of America, and you do too. Try to evoke in all of us a sense of a thing that we love, that we need to be protected. We need to be reminded that we love it, and so we need to act to protect it. And part of that means, I mean, when you're talking about an oligarchy that's based in tech, that's based in information, that's based in the currency of truth and attention, there really is a call to the individual to try to hold on to our civic responsibility and hold on to reality as a basis of keeping citizenship alive, of making sure that we know what's going on in the world. I mean, that's why he said the thing about social media not doing fact checking. That's why he said the thing about the free press crumbling. I mean, he made a bunch of news here. He talked about wanting 18-year term limits for the Supreme Court. He wants a constitutional amendment so that there isn't bizarre presidential immunity for anything a president does. He made news at the outset by explaining that this ceasefire between Gaza and Israel was negotiated by his administration. And yes, they kept the Trump folks in the loop because they're going to have to implement it. But it was Biden's administration that negotiated it. I mean, all of that was news and good to get. But this was a love letter to America for a outgoing president who is very worried about what he describes as oligarchy, and he thinks that we as individual citizens are going to have to change the country a lot in order to stop it from this drift that it's on, which he portrayed in very, very ominous terms.
We begin with major breaking news out of the Middle East, where we can now report that negotiators in Qatar have reached a Gaza ceasefire deal, and it has been accepted by Hamas. The agreement lays out a 6-week initial ceasefire phase that would begin in a day or two. Israelis go through a cabinet process. After that, there would be a 48-hour wait, and then a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces. But first, the most important thing is that after 48 hours from whether it's Thursday night or Friday, the hostages would begin to be released from Gaza as early as this weekend, Sunday. Israeli forces then would be withdrawing from central Gaza, from populated areas. There'd be a return of displaced Palestinians to North Gaza. Under the deal, 33 hostages would come out initially, including all women, including soldiers, civilians, children, and men over 50. We understand in that group there would be some Americans. We know that there are at least 3 surviving Americans that we've been in touch with. And one of the elderly is Keith Siegel, Aviva Siegel's husband, who is 65 years old and would be one of the first Americans. He would be the first American to come out, as well as injured Americans. There are 2 others that we know of who would likely be coming out in that first group. And we begin our coverage of this major breaking news with NBC News international correspondent Danielle Hamagian live in Tel Aviv. Danielle, so what are we hearing about where the negotiations are? My information is that it's been confirmed by officials here in Washington, but that they are, by agreement, they are letting the Qataris announce it first in Doha, who have really been the go-betweens with Hamas and who have been the principal point for the negotiations, with participation, of course, from Egypt. Danielle?
You're absolutely right, Andrea, and we are being briefed on the fact that this is it. The deal is done, and we are now waiting, as you say, for the mediators in Doha. The Qatari PM will be holding a press conference, and we await now the official announcement. But to think that this has taken 15 months when most of those involved in these talks thought that it would take perhaps a matter of days, perhaps weeks, to get all those hostages back. It's taken 15 agonizing months, agony for the civilians in Gaza who have endured relentless airstrikes, agony for the hostages who, for the most part, and presumably have been held in tunnels, and agony for the family members of those hostages who, you know, in some cases live just a few miles away from Gaza. They go to bed at night, wake up in the morning, not knowing if their loved ones are dead or alive. But here we are, and we are waiting for the Qatari Prime Minister to lay out the details of this proposal that has been approved and accepted by both sides. What we know, according to the Reuters news agency, is that, as has been reported over the past few days, we know that in the first stage of this deal, which would last 6 weeks, 33 hostages will be released on humanitarian ground. It was 34 up until last week. One more hostage was found dead in a tunnel. They are going to be all women, children, and civilians over the age of 50, those who are ill and severely injured. What we now know is that in return, in exchange for the release of those hostages, hundreds and hundreds of Palestinian detainees will be released. Now, it's worth pointing out here that since October 7th, 2023, Israel has arrested thousands of people in the West Bank, many of them held in what's called administrative detention. They have not been charged, they've not been tried, and Israel stands accused of amassing all these Palestinians just for this moment to be able to release them in this deal. So what we understand, according to various reports in Israeli media as well as the Reuters news agency, is that for every civilian civilian hostage who will be released, 30 Palestinians will be released in exchange. For every female soldier, 50 Palestinian prisoners will be released. Now, according to a senior Israeli official, they said to me that they know that there was a price to pay for the hostages, and they know that there was a, quote, special price to pay for the female hostages. So hundreds are expected to be released. And during this period, there'll be a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from central Gaza, from the more densely populated areas, to a buffer zone along the border. They will also withdraw from what's called the Netzarim corridor, which runs east to west and effectively splits the Gaza Strip in half, allowing for the hundreds of thousands of Gazans who have been displaced back to northern Gaza. Andrea.
Well, you heard, or many of you heard, President Biden's final speech from the Oval Office tonight. Tomorrow night, you will hear his final interview from the Oval Office in a discussion that I will have with President Biden in the Oval Office tomorrow. You'll see it at this hour tomorrow night. I was in the Oval Office tonight in preparation for that, in the back of the room with the press section there while President Biden was delivering that final speech. And what you could not see in that frame, where it's just the one shot of the president, is off to the side where his family was, First Lady, Vice President, Second Gentleman. And, for example, things like when the president was thanking his wife and thanking his vice president, they were sitting beside each other and they were both holding hands in what was, for them, a very emotional moment in a room that was otherwise occupied by 3 cameras and the people running that system to deliver that speech to you, and just a couple of reporters, me taking a couple of notes in this notebook as I was standing there. And there was a point in the speech early where I made a note to myself that this was reminding me of Ike, meaning Dwight Eisenhower, and his military-industrial complex warning. And sure enough, a moment later, that's exactly what President Biden was talking about. When World War II began in Europe in 1939, Dwight Eisenhower was a member of the 19th biggest army in the world. That's right. The United States Army then was smaller than the Army of Portugal. But by the time General Eisenhower was in command of the largest invasion by sea in history on D-Day, just 6 years later, he was leading the most powerful army in the world. And 16 years after that, as President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower was worried about the influence of the American military when combined with the even more powerful influence of the richest men in the country and in the world who supplied arms to the American military and to the world. President Eisenhower described that as the military-industrial complex. He described it that way for the very first time in his farewell address on January 17th, 1961, delivered just as President Biden did tonight from the Oval Office.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
That is the only statement that President Eisenhower made in his 8 years in the presidency that changed the way we thought about what we were looking at and dealing with. The military-industrial complex was the perfect descriptor for a new power that had emerged in America that wasn't about a single individual. It was a complex and a powerful one. In Dwight Eisenhower's 8 years in the presidency, he never said anything as important as that warning about the military-industrial complex. He never said anything that memorable. He never said anything that has lived in history the way that line has lived in history, and he said it in the very last speech that he gave as president. Decades from now, President Biden's warning about the oligarchy taking shape in America and what he called the tech-industrial complex might be the most remembered lines spoken by President Biden.
That's why my farewell address tonight, I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. This is a dangerous concentration, and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. We see the consequences all across America, and we've seen it before. More than a century ago, but the American people stood up to the robber barons back then and busted the trusts. They didn't punish the wealthy. Just made the wealthy play by the rules everybody else had to. Workers want rights to earn their fair share. You know, they were dealt into the deal, and it helped put us on a path to building the largest middle class, the most prosperous century any nation in the world has ever seen. And we've got to do that again. In the last 4 years, that is exactly what we've done. People should be able to make as much as they can, but play by the same rules, pay their fair share of taxes. So much is at stake. Right now, the existential threat of climate change has never been clearer. Just look across the country, from California to North Carolina. That's why I signed the most significant climate and clean energy law ever in the history of the world, and the rest of the world is trying to model it now. It's working, creating jobs and industries of the future. Now, we've proven we don't have to choose between protecting the environment and growing the economy. We're doing both. The powerful forces want to wield their unchecked influence to eliminate the steps we've taken to tackle the climate crisis, to serve their own interest for power and profit. We must not be bullied into sacrificing the future of our children and our grandchildren. We must keep pushing forward and push faster. There's no time to waste. It's also clear that American leadership in technology is an unparalleled source of innovation that can transform lives. We see the same dangers of the concentration of technology, power, and wealth. You know, his farewell address, President Eisenhower spoke of the dangers of the military-industrial complex. He warned us then about, and I quote, the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power, end of quote. 6 decades later, I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech-industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power.
I was rushed out of the Oval Office immediately after the speech, along with the other reporters standing in this very small space for reporters to be able to observe it there. And so I did not get to see the emotion that filled the room. I got a hint of it as I was leaving. I could see the president hugging the vice president, the first lady also hugging almost all together there. The emotion of the Biden staff, which was against the wall, the opposite wall of the family, and the family on one wall, all converging on the president, as I say, as I was being rushed out. So that swell of emotion that happened there was something I wasn't able to observe, but knew was coming, because Joe Biden served more years in government before he became president than any other president. And so this was the final speech in the longest career of any politician who has ever made it to the presidency.
My eternal thanks to you, the American people. After 50 years of public service, I give you my word. I still believe in the idea for which this nation stands. A nation where the strength of our institutions and the character of our people matter and must endure. Now it's your turn to stand guard. May you all be the keeper of the flame. May you keep the faith. I love America. You love it too. God bless you all. May God protect our troops. Thank you for this great honor.
Today at her confirmation hearing, Pam Bondi, Trump's nominee to be Attorney General of the United States, had an incredibly hard time giving a straight answer to a very straightforward question.
Are you prepared to say today under oath without reservation that Donald Trump lost the presidential contest to Joe Biden in 2020?
Ranking Member Durbin, President Biden is the president of the United States.
You have to be able to say that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. You dodged that question when you were asked directly by Senator Durbin.
Who won the 2020 presidential election?
Joe Biden is the president of the United States.
Donald Trump, you lost the 2020 election. Can you tell us that here today?
Senator, what I can tell you is I will never play politics. You're trying to engage me in a gotcha.
A gotcha? She called the question, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election, a gotcha? For almost anyone else in the world, that is actually a pretty easy question to answer. Yes, Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. But for Pam Bondi, the question is tricky. You might not remember this, but before Rudy Giuliani stole the spotlight with his dripping hair dye and his press conference at Four Seasons Total Landscaping, before that happened, Pam Bondi was the face of Trump's legal challenges over the 2020 election. In fact, the main reason Giuliani ended up giving that infamous press conference outside a random landscaping company was because Pam Bondi's press conference in the middle of Philadelphia 2 days earlier was literally drowned out by protesters. You couldn't actually hear what she was saying. But Bondi was a central part of Trump's efforts to contest the results of that election, and particularly in the state of Pennsylvania, where Bondi was one of the key Trump world figures pushing the big lie. Here was Pam Bondi, days after the 2020 election, claiming there had been fraud in Pennsylvania. Now, pay attention to the faces of the Fox News hosts here, because clearly even they don't believe her.
We do have evidence of cheating, and I'll talk about that in a minute. These fake ballots that are coming in late.
What,
and back
Pam?
to the observation, they're not letting us watch the process.
Pam, did you just say fake ballots?
There could be.
Have you heard stories of, ballots that are fake? And if so, just tell us what you know.
Well, we know that ballots have been dumped. There were ballots that were found early on. We've heard that people were receiving ballots that were dead.
Anyway, now the very fact that Pam Bondi pushed the lie that there was foul play in the 2020 election, just that very fact alone should be enough to disqualify her from being the nation's top cop. But today, not only did Bondi refuse to say Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, she also continued 4 years later to claim that there was some kind of foul play in the state of Pennsylvania.
I accept, of course, that Joe Biden is president of the United States, but what I can tell you is what I saw firsthand when I went to Pennsylvania as an advocate for the campaign. I was an advocate for the campaign, and I was on the ground in Pennsylvania, and I saw many things there. But do I accept the results? Of course I do.
I saw many things there. Sure you did. For most people, asking who won the 2020 election is a fact-based question. But when it comes to Donald Trump, it is a question of loyalty. Are you willing to lie to the American people, embarrassing yourself over and over and over again, and endangering democracy, all because it's what Donald Trump wants you to do? It is a litmus test. And by not giving a straight answer on the question of whether or not Trump lost the 2020 election, well, Pam Bondi passed that test. But believe it or not, that was not the most concerning question Pam Bondi refused to answer today.
The investigators will be investigated.
In 2023, Pam Bondi promised to investigate the investigators. Today, at her confirmation hearing, Democratic senators pressed for answers about whether Bondi still held those views as President-elect Trump's nominee to run the Department of Justice.
The president has said Jack Smith should go to jail. Will you investigate Jack Smith?
Senator, I haven't seen the file. I haven't seen the investigation. I haven't looked at anything.
Are you aware of a factual predicate to investigate Jack Smith? Yes or no?
Senator, what I'm hearing on the news is
Are you aware of
horrible.
a...
Do I know if he committed a crime? I have not looked
You seem reluctant to answer a simple question. Let me ask you a different simple question. The president also wants to jail Liz Cheney. Sitting here today, are you aware of any factual basis to investigate Liz Cheney? Yes or no?
Senator, that's a hypothetical, and I'm not going to answer that question.
No, it's not hypothetical.
It's not a hypothetical. Joining me now is NBC News national security editor and author of Where Tyranny Begins, the Justice Department, the FBI, and the War on Democracy, the great David Rohde. David, we spent a little time in the block before this talking about Pam Bondi's actions in the past, but her sort of marching orders for the future, if you're listening to that, I think should maybe send a chill up the spine of anybody in the Department of Justice and people interested in the law. What did you make of those responses there? Repeated questioning from Adam Schiff.
She's, we talked about it. She's talking to an audience of one.
Yeah.
And I had that feeling also with the Hegseth, confirmation hearing yesterday. She in particular was trying to be very careful and kept trying to avoid this, but she was clearly lying. She wasn't going to cross. She was not going to say Joe Biden won the 2020 election. She was not going to rule out prosecuting anyone. So you saw that over and over again where she's somehow trying to, walk this walk that will keep the president supporting her, but not get her into a deeper trouble in terms of it's an amazing testament to our politics today.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, what does it suggest about her fealty towards Trump as Attorney General? I want to play another piece of sound where that sense of loyalty is even more pronounced. It's an exchange between Ted Cruz and Pam Bondi today. Let's take a listen.
The last 4 years, we've seen Donald Trump indicted and prosecuted not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 separate times.
And 2 assassination attempts, Senator.
These prosecutions were brought because partisan prosecutors were terrified that the American people would do exactly what they did in November of 2024 and vote to re-elect Donald J. Trump.
By 77.3%. Million Americans, 77.3 million Americans.
I mean, did they rehearse it? Like, it was just, I've never seen anything like that, where you have literally a kind of a call and response between a Republican senator and a nominee, all in service of the president-elect's ego.
Particularly for Attorney General. And since Watergate, the Attorney General is supposed to be independent. You have to have a law enforcement official that's doing investigations based on facts, not on what the president who appointed them, wants them to do. And the problem for her is that, Trump, whether he believes it or it's just politics, he wants Liz Cheney investigated. He wants, Jack Smith investigated. She's on a mission impossible.
Yeah.
Jeff Sessions had the same problem. Fire Mueller, and he wouldn't do it. And he was forced out eventually. Bill Barr, investigate the 2020 election, back up my fraud claims. Bill Barr doesn't do it, and he's forced out. So people who worked in the first Trump administration, the Justice Department, have told me this is the conundrum. She's supposed to have facts to actually convict people in court, and they don't exist. This is what, current people say, Biden administration people in the Justice Department. So we'll see how she tries to navigate this for the next several years, but it's going to be difficult. How does she please Donald Trump and have facts in a court of law?
Yeah, the pressure on her is going to be enormous. What strikes me also in this moment is the degree to which it is a fait accompli that she will be confirmed, right? Democrats are doing their best to draw attention to her controversial positions from 2020 and her positions now, or at least her sort of worldview as it comes to an enemies list and the punishment of political adversaries. But by virtue of the fact that she's not Matt Gaetz and that she's actually a lawyer, it seems like that's enough. The bar here is so extraordinarily low.
And what was fascinating was that the name that kept coming up in the hearing today was Kash Patel.
Yeah.
Who does have an enemies list, who published a book in 2023 that listed 60 people that were part of what he said was the executive branch deep state. And he talked over and over again in this book, I read his whole book, about the criminals in the deep state, that there's the secret plot by bureaucrats. Look, Ronald Reagan would complain that too many people in the government, too many, the government's too big. This is completely different. These bureaucrats are plotting treason to undermine the president, and they need to be criminally investigated. So, again, she's in this hot seat. What will she be able to deliver? What will be enough for President Trump?
A House Oversight Committee hearing was briefly derailed yesterday after Representative Jasmine Crockett's criticism of Nancy Mace's fixation on anti-trans messaging led to this extraordinary moment.
I can see that somebody's campaign coffers really are struggling right now. So she gonna keep saying trans, trans, trans so that people will feel threatened. And child, listen, I want y'all to tell me whether or
Do not call me a child. I am no child.
I want
Don't
to
even
find
start.
out
I am a grown
which
woman.
of those
I am 47 years
emails
old. I have broken
actually
more
have
glass ceilings than you
Chairman,
ever
I
will.
am reclaiming my time.
You will not do that. I
Order.
am not a child.
Chairman, I am
not a
reclaiming
child.
my time.
If you want to take it outside,
Mr. Chairman. Republican Chair James Comer ultimately ruled that threatening another member is okay as long as it's in the form of a question or if, it's Republicans doing it. Also, if you needed any further confirmation that Nancy Mace lives a homogeneous lifestyle, Representative Crockett said child, not child. Nancy Mace is from South Carolina, America's OG slave market, which to this day is composed of 1/3 black people. So, you'd think she'd be passingly familiar with the term. A point Congresswoman Crockett underscored by tweeting the lone word after the exchange. And Congresswoman Crockett joins me now. Congresswoman, there's a thing that the young folks call clout chasing.
Oh, absolutely.
Let me show you the pinned tweet on Nancy Mace's Twitter right now. Here's two tweets. One, I am no child. I'm going the F-U-C-K off. So cussing, threatening you. What is happening here?
Listen, I don't really know what to say of Donald Trump's party because it's not the Republican Party. And for anyone who considers themselves to be a Republican, then I ask you, if you are someone that believes in small government, if you are someone who believes in family values, if you are someone who believes in law and order, there is nothing about the people that still have an R in front of their name that lines up with that. it is time to find a new home. I know that it can be easy to just say, well, let me select the R. But if we're going to get back to real standards and if we're going to actually get back to conducting business in the House, then we need to get some serious people. And right now, people play on the fact that they can make money. I literally had my team look up her FEC documents because in my soul, I was like, you must be broke. She's not exactly broke, but I have 3 times as much money on hand. She needs some more money. So this was about money. And the idea that you would do it at the expense of children or the idea that you would do it at the expense of one of your colleagues is a problem. And the fact that you would go so far as to try to threaten violence and then hide behind the fact that they don't believe in law and order and then want to play with me because she knew that I was about to go in on her. And she thought that maybe she was going to end up with a B6 moment like her friend Marjorie. And ultimately, she kind of did because people are asking for the T-shirts and we going to help them out.
I mean, the reality is to your point of trying to raise money, she's obviously looking for attention.
Yes.
This is somebody who said to her aides allegedly that she wanted during January 6th to get punched in the face so that she could go on Fox with a bruised face. This is somebody who knows that her party spent more than $200 million, $215 million on TV ads specifically attacking trans rights. She used to be pro-trans. She used to be pro-LGBTQ. She shifted and now has decided this is her mission. It's her ministry. Let me play the other thing that's on one of those pinned tweets on her, the video that's on it.
Coming from a party that can't define what a woman is and won't give women the right to privacy. You all want men with penises, chicks with in the bathroom with us. You want women to be forced to undress in front of men in the locker room and in dressing rooms. And it's so hypocritical for you to sit here and say and be, screaming from the rooftops about the right to privacy and civil rights when you don't respect women.
There's a level of vulgarity there that I think is undecorous for a member of Congress. The whole B6 moment, and we've talked about this, came from you avoiding saying
another B,
a curse word that starts with
another
B.
B.
And so the idea is that you went out of your way to not use a vulgarity with a fellow member. And that's how that whole moment happened. The fact that she not only felt the need to attack you and threaten you, but that she literally used another vulgarity on camera in the well of the House. Do you believe she should be sanctioned? And what do you make of her ethics and her morals?
Okay, so there are no ethics, there are no morals, but we know that that's throughout the MAGA kind of establishment, right? Look at the guy that's about to swear in. He is setting the standard, and we know that that is very low. I do think, though, again, this goes back to if you really are a true red Republican, is this what you think of when you think of family values, that the fact that your children cannot watch a committee hearing
on C-SPAN?
Correct, on C-SPAN, because you never know if somebody like this is going to just randomly. This was an organizational meeting. This was not a hearing about trans folk. I do want to be clear. But every single hearing, she is going to talk about trans people. She did it today when we had a telework hearing. I don't know what trans folk got to do with telework, but she was going to make sure that she brought it in. So she's going to keep doing it because for some reason she's making money. But I'm telling you, she's not even making good money off of it. Like, you probably could find something else to do. Maybe start serving your constituents. Maybe actually come up with legislation that will help them so that they know that they will be safer when the next storm comes through on the East Coast. Maybe figure out how to bring some jobs to your constituents in South Carolina. Maybe figure out how you can have worker protections for the people that are working in factories in South Carolina. I got a long list of stuff she could do that would actually be helpful to not only her coffers, but also her constituents.
She's introduced more than a half a dozen bills specifically about trans people. She's obsessed. And she didn't used to care about this issue at all. In fact, she was pro-LGBTQ. Look it up. Google is there to help. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, thank you, who's always creative and non-vulgar, which we appreciate. It's because she's a member of Delta Sigma Sorority Incorporated. Coming up.
Happy belated Founders Day.
Happy belated Founders Day. Thank you.